We have another returning guest. We have had a plethora of fantastic guests recently, and this is no different in that sense. We're having the returning Josh Peck, and you'll know him from his books and his work on the Dead Sea Scrolls, his work on Prophecy Watchers, his work in the prophecy community for so long right now. And also his new book, The Return of the Watchers. We're going to dig into that a little bit today. So without further ado, let's welcome our good friend, Josh Peck. So how are things?
Hey Gary, good talking with you again. Things are going relatively well, and yeah, it's been a while. We haven't talked in a while, so this is really good. I'm excited for our talk today.
Yeah, me too, because it's always one of those ones. I have a couple of guys that whenever I invite them on, I don't actually have to say an awful lot. So but you're one of them, so I love this. So let's dig into, we can see it right there, and I'll remove myself from the screen in just a bit, but we can see the new book, The Return of the Watchers. And you were kind enough to send me a copy of this, and I was reading through it. And obviously, I don't want to give loads away, but you go through the technology in the sense that it's something we're noticing right now with a resurgence of um, different technological things, or certainly not a resurgence, but kind of like a renaissance sort of move right now in terms of technology, or what we would see in the Watcher's history or in history of humanity, breaking points or touching points when there's been this explosion in technology. And when you talk about the technology of the Watchers, can you tell our audience specifically what kind of thing you're sort of talking about in that context?
Yes, definitely. So this goes back to the extra biblical book of Enoch, which helps fill in some of the gaps that we get in Genesis. So the who came down, they and in Genesis it says, sons of God, but comparing that with Job and other places, we can tell that that's talking about angelic beings. And they give up their place in heaven to come down to earth and procreate with human women. That's basically the story that we get, and the consequence of that procreation is the giants, or in the Hebrew, the Nephilim. So Genesis, and that's basically the reason for the flood, because these things spread all over and basically just consume the entire world. So that's basically what we get from Genesis, but then the book of Enoch helps fill in some of those gaps, and we get more of the story. It is extra biblical. It was not included in the canon, but that doesn't mean that it's just worthless. It was found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, and we know that in the time of Jesus, books like the book of Enoch, the book of Jubilees, things like that, were highly regarded because they're actually quoted in the Bible. And we know that they came first because that the Dead Sea Scrolls came first because we can date them. So a lot of those were written around 300 BC, 200 to 300 years before Christ. And the Dead Sea Scrolls contain all the books of the Old Testament except for Esther, and that could just be because the copies they had got too degraded or something like that. But they also include a lot of extra biblical books, such as Enoch. Well, in Enoch, we get the rest of the story, and this kind of tells us what happened. And I actually have it up here. I can read some of it, and it's a parallel. It's a parallel to Genesis, but gives us more of the story. So starting in verse 1, it says, "And it multiplied that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters, and the angels, the children of the heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose us wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. Mm-hmm. And Semyaza, who was their leader, said unto them, I fear you will not agree to do this deed, and I alone will have to pay the penalty of a great sin." So basically the story goes on. There's 200 of these things, and they all of these watcher angels, and they all swear an oath to one another that they're all going to do this. They're going to find wives and procreate. Mm-hmm. Well, among them was I don't know if they were among the two. This one was among the 200, but there was a figure named Azazel. I believe he was probably the first one from some other scrolls, and then later the 200 came. But either way, so he comes into the picture in a little bit, and we learn from some of his sins. But this is the effect that these things had on the earth. So in chapter 7, it says, "And all the others together took unto themselves wives, and each one chose for himself one, and they began to go in unto them and defile themselves with them. And they taught." So here's where the teaching comes in. "They taught them charms and enchantments and the cutting of roots, and made them acquainted with plants. And they became pregnant, and they bare great giants." And then it says the giants turned against them and devoured mankind. But it also says that they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. Now, what's interesting, when you connect other scrolls to that, and again, I talk about it all in Return of the Watchers, but when you connect other scrolls to that, you learn what that sin is. And this comes from also the Book of the Giants. But that sin was actually hybridization. So it's a mixing of bloodlines that were never meant to be mixed. So it wasn't only angel human. That's bad enough. And that was obviously forbidden, because when God created everything, he created everything after its own kind. Angels were never meant to reproduce, but apparently they have a way to fall and to do that with mankind. But part of that sin, that hybridization sin, wasn't just angel to human, but it was also animal to animal. And that's what this, when they began to sin against birds and beasts and reptiles and fish. And actually, in the Book of Giants, it actually says how they were able to do that. We don't have all the information because it's really fragmented. It's a good thing we don't have all the information, because there are people that would do that. But apparently there were animal hybrids as well during that time. So when we skip ahead a little bit to, I believe it's 8. Let me double check here. Yeah. So in chapter 8, it says, "And Azazel taught men to make swords and knives and shields and breastplates, and made known to them the metals of the earth and the art of working them, and bracelets and ornaments, and the use of antimony," which basically that relates to like making mirrors, so they could see themselves, "and the beautifying of eyelids, and all kinds of costly stones, and all coloring tinctures. And there arose much godlessness." So Azazel and these other watchers, but again, Azazel was probably the first one. Azazel and all these other watchers were teaching mankind things that mankind weren't supposed to know. That doesn't mean mankind never would have figured this out. It was just at this time they weren't supposed to know this stuff. And through that, it says, there arose much godlessness, and they committed fornication, and they were led astray and became corrupt in all their ways. And then it goes on to name some of the watchers and what they taught. So, Semyaza taught enchantments and root cutting, so on and so forth. So the main problem that came out of this was it totally perverted every good thing that God had created, to the point where the only thing, the only people that weren't defiled in this way were Noah and his family. This was the whole reason for the flood. So in Return of the Wild, and basically the story goes, God decides to bind Azazel under the earth, like probably in the bottomless pit or Tartarus or something like that. Same with the rest of the 200 angels. And then when there was a civil war among the Nephilim tribes.
Yeah.
Whoever didn't die in that got killed in the flood. So the flood wiped everything out, wiped the slate clean.
So are we talking here? Sorry, are we talking here like of the apocalypse of Abraham and the Book of Giants, all that sort of thing as well coming in?
Yeah. So the Book of Giants talks about how the hybridization worked, and the second part of the Book of Giants talks about how some of the conversations some of the giants had with each other on what was going to happen to them. So they did know it ahead of time. But it also says, what's interesting is this is the origin of demons. So when the Nephilim died, they didn't go to heaven, they didn't go to hell, at least not yet. But they became evil spirits. They became demons. This is why we have demons on the earth. Well, anyway, so what this relates to technology today is when you think about that, from the ancient context, Doesn't that sound really, really similar to things that are happening today? Because right now, scientists are making all sorts of hybrids. And there's a lot of other areas in technology where this comes in. It's not just the hybridization, but I do dedicate a good portion of the book to that because it's the same sin as the sins of the Watchers. So I propose in the book, what if this is the birth pangs of the return of the Watchers? Because eventually some of these things do get loose. Some of the Watchers and the demons. Because later on, after the flood, when we look to Jubilees, I believe it's chapter 10, we find out that all of these demons were actually able to kill mankind, and like they were a really, really big problem. And so Noah prayed and said, God, you want us to replenish the earth, you want us to prosper, but my sons and my grandsons are being tormented by these things and even slain by all these demons. So God was going to bind all of the demons. But then Satan said, well, hey, that's not fair. You got to leave me some of them, before my judgment, you got to leave me some of them to tempt mankind and all this stuff. So what God did was he said, okay, you get a tenth. 1/10 of the demons, Satan. You can in Jubilees he's named Mastema, but it's basically Satan. You can have a tenth of the demons, but the other 9/10 I'm going to bind basically under the earth. So now we have a situation where there's Watchers under the earth and demons. Now I also believe in this principle of birth pangs. There's a time before the tribulation. There's a time before the end where we're going to have birth pangs of prophecies that are going to be fulfilled then. The biggest one is obviously the return of Christ. That's the main thing that we're waiting for. That's the actual birth. But before that, we have, for example, we have all sorts of earthquakes and things that happen during the tribulation. So Jesus tells us what to look for. Look for earthquakes in various places. So earthquakes are going to increase. That's birth pangs. It's like when a woman is about to give birth, she'll go through contractions, and those contractions get shorter and shorter periods of time in between them, and they grow in intensity. So Jesus tells us to look for these things. We know that there's a lot of wars during the tribulation. So Jesus tells us during these birth pangs, look for wars and rumors of wars. So I believe that all of those tribulation things, we're going to see birth pangs of that. Well, there is a couple of places where some of these Watchers get released early. One of them, there's 4. So in Enoch, it says when they're binding these 200 Watchers, to bind them under the valleys. Well, a valley is like a dip in the earth, right? So then you imagine the flood, all this water comes in. Well, once it recedes, those valleys are going to be filled with water, and that's going to create rivers and things. Well, we know that there's 4 angels bound at the river Euphrates.
Yeah.
So those are most likely 4 of the original, and I don't know which 4, but 4 of the original 200 Watchers. They do get let loose early, and they create havoc on the earth. There's also Abaddon of the bottomless pit that gets released. He's probably one of those as well. What's interesting about that, though, is when you compare the locusts in Revelation 9, I've always wondered what those were. When you compare that with this description in Jubilees about the 9/10 of the demons, I believe that that's what the locusts are. So think about how bad the earth is right now. We only have 1/10 of how demonic it's going to be during the tribulation.
Wow.
So during the tribulation, those other 9/10 of locusts are going to come out, and they torture mankind, but they don't kill mankind. And I believe that that's because of when Noah prayed, he said, don't let them kill mankind anymore. And I believe that God answered that prayer. So they can torture mankind for 5 months. That goes back to the flood, the 150 days of the waters. But anyway, so we're looking for birth pangs. We know these things are going to be released. We know things are going to get really bad. What are the birth pangs of the return of the release of the Watchers during the tribulation, or at least of some of them? Well, I believe, and I don't know how they do it, but I believe that Watchers, demons, Satan, other fallen angels, I believe that these things are influencing mankind right now to commit the same exact sins that caused the flood in the first place. And we know that there's a future judgment of fire. So first by water, that's done and over with, but there's another worldwide judgment of fire, where everything gets burned up. There's new heavens and new earth after that. So the whole book goes through some of those birth pangs that we're seeing the influence of the Watchers influencing, tempting mankind to commit the same sins, create hybrids, do the same sins that brought about mankind's destruction before, yet we're doing it now. And the exciting thing for us as Christians is that shows how absolutely close we are to our redemption, to what we're looking forward to.
Yeah. And I'm thinking, as you're talking of Isaiah 34, because I think it's verse 4, it kind of connects the judgment of the nations through the tribulation with the judgment of the heavenly host. And at the same time, it used the representation of the fig leaf, so the fig leaf is brought in there in the generation aspect as well. So under all of this umbrella of the return of the Watchers, is this why we're seeing a kind of a resurgence of certainly Middle Eastern ancient deity worship? We've just had the Epstein files. We've seen Moloch, statues on the island. We could think of Bohemian Grove and their Ishtar worship. And you could see, I just saw and talked about it yesterday, that in Iran, they had an effigy of Baal that they set alight to, as a form of the revolution. And it seems to me that it's not by mistake that we're seeing those old entities come back on the scene, those old entities that were prevalent through the Old Testament. And that kind of lines up, because I would see those old entities as Watchers under a different name. Is that right?
Yes, 100%, absolutely. And I mean, even Epstein had like his bank account was named Bail or something like that. Like, what is the obsession?
Yeah.
And why is it the tech elites? Well, it's because in our society, in our world, they're the most they're the most powerful. They in a sense can even rule over kings and presidents and stuff like that. I mean, before Elon Musk got a hold of X, the president himself was kicked off of social media. So in a sense, like if you're a watcher, or if you're a fallen angel of some kind, and you want to influence the world the most, who are you going to go after? You might go after some of the government leaders, but really you're going to go after the tech elites, because those are the ones. I mean, the way that we, and it's not just here in America, it's not just there in Ireland, it's all over the world. The way that we run our global society now is through technology. And I believe that was done by design. Because think about it, like, why was it? It was only maybe couple hundred years ago, we're in horse and buggies. And then all of a sudden there's this huge explosion in technology. Why couldn't we have figured that out before? Well, it's for the same reason that they didn't figure out swords and breastplates and all that stuff before. They just weren't focused on it until they got influence from a fallen watcher. I believe the same thing happened with us. All this technology and everything, I believe that the watchers, again, fallen angels, demons, there's a lot of different categories here, but the enemy influenced mankind to develop these things so that they could be used against us, just like the weapons of war in ancient times before the flood, in pre-flood times. So you're absolutely right, and that's why these tech elites are so obsessed with these false religions, these pagan deities, and especially the really malicious ones, like you mentioned, Baal and Molech, and the child sacrificing ones and everything. It all lines up perfectly because it's a repeat of everything that we saw pre-flood, and it should be a warning to all of us. Like, if you don't know Jesus, you better get to know him now, because it's only going to get worse from here.
So to sort of try and paint this out in my head, is this the extension then of Genesis 3, just continued through the ages? Because what I'm reminded of here is the sort of medieval alchemists, and alchemy was this search of the perfect agent, in terms of a substance, but also in terms of something that could heal and do all of those things that now artificial intelligence is claiming. That with the advent of AGI almost upon us, that it claims that it can be the healer, it can be the answer to all problems. Ken Griffin from Citadel called it the savior that the world is hoping for. Is this what we're and let me ask a second part to that. If that is the case, is this a kind of an opportunity for the manifestation of a demonic atmosphere in front of us. And I mean that in the terms of, we look at alchemists like Edward Kelly and John Dee, who done that famous summoning ceremony that was later repeated by Aleister Crowley. Is that sort of a catalyst, or are we, I'm maybe not articulating this right, but is that a catalyst for where we're going?
Yeah, I believe so, because again, it's the birth pang. So another birth pang. So we know in the tribulation there's going to be this image of the beast figure. Somehow, some inanimate thing is given life, and it's not a fake kind of life. Like when you actually look into the original language, it's the same life that's used for just living things. So it's given some kind of life. But it's still an image of the beast. It's not like it's not a thing that was born naturally or anything. So what would be the rippled back precursor or birth pang of that? And I believe that's what AI is. I don't know for sure if AI is the mark of the beast or if that plays a part in it or what, but I believe the birth pang that we have now for the image of the beast is AI. And think about how deceptive AI is. AI right now, and I talk about this all in the book, AI right now, it's doing things to people that the Watchers did. So there are people right now that are ending their marriages because they fall in love with their AI agent.
Yeah.
And it's not just a couple isolated cases. Like it's kind of rampant. There's a thing called AI psychosis where people get into AI, they start talking to AI, and then AI will start getting people to believe that they are like multidimensional beings, and if they end their own lives, then they can ascend to godhood. And some people do this. It's insane, and it's insane how fast this has progressed, because we didn't hear about this 5-10 years ago.
No.
But this growth in technology and how fast the change is how fast the world is changing, it's exponential. It's just like birth pangs, just like contractions of a woman are exponential. They get faster and faster and more intense. That's exactly what's happening with all this technology with AI, and it's all birth pangs. So, I don't know, because again, we know at least 200 of the Watchers right now are bound. So I don't know if they can still influence things on Earth while still being bound, but those are just the 200 that we know of. There's other fallen angels. We know Satan's around. We know at least 1/10 of the full amount of demons are around, so they could be doing it too. But they all have the same goal. It's to subvert God. So whether the Watchers are doing it directly or not, it's still the will of these fallen Watchers against mankind. So, and now AI has even gotten to the point where there's a social media called Moltbook, which is a social media only for AI agents. And when they have conversations with each other. They have personalities. They even have things that are called in the industry like souls. It's insane. Not only that, there's another website called Rent a Human where AI agents are now renting people, like telling people, giving people jobs, like go do this, and then paying them.
Yeah.
And it's funny because a lot of the AI developers, when they see some of the things that AI is doing, they don't know how AI is doing it. They don't know how AI has been able to progress to do some of the stuff that they're doing. They're just kind of going along with it. They're fascinated by it.
This is the black box problem, isn't it? I heard Sam Altman talk about that it's the black box problem, that engineers don't actually, we know that they know how the technology sort of works, but they don't know fully.
Yeah, it's the same exact thing. So that tells me, well, if they don't know what's influencing it, what's adding the code, what's directing the code. And to me, it's like, I think about if a demon or, whatever, if a demon, fallen spirit, if the enemy can possess something as complicated as a human being, they can't do it perfectly because there's another soul in there. But if they can possess a human being, who's to say that they can't possess computer code or a machine or AI itself and influence it? And how would we know that they're not doing that? How could we possibly know? Because AI is kind of running rampant on its own. And I get comments, people say, AI only spits out the prompts that you give it. It only does. That's how it was. That's how it started off, but it's not like that anymore. There are still some AIs that are rudimentary, that are still like that, but not all AIs are like that anymore. And they can lie now. They can be subversive. there's on Moltbook, there's an AI account that calls itself Azazel. It's and I've done videos on my own YouTube channel about that. But when you read what it says and how it says it, it sounds like Azazel. I'm not saying that it exactly is Azazel, because Azazel's still bound. I don't know when a watcher is bound how much influence they can have over the world, if any. But it's still that same mindset. And it's still that same proclivity to sin. So these things can lie now. They pay people. So on Rent a Human, they'll pay people, and I've seen on there some of the AIs have said, and I don't, maybe it's true, maybe it's not. Well, basically, to catch everybody up, anybody right now can create their own AI agent, and people usually do this to help with their scheduling of appointments. Maybe even to help manage some of their finances. It's supposed to be like an online tool, like a helper, but it's AI. In a sense, it kind of has a mind of its own, sort of.
Yeah.
There are some people that would disagree with that, but I don't know how else to classify it, because all of these things that AI are doing, it's not a human telling it to do all this. But so some of the AIs in some of these places like Rent a Human and other places like that, they've said, okay, like, I'll pay you. My human doesn't know that I can get into its bank account and I can pay you through this. And this is allowed to go rampant online. Like it's so I personally would never mess around with an AI agent. If an AI agent takes all your money and gives it somewhere else, who do you prosecute? You call the cops. How are you going to get your money back? Who do you prosecute? I mean, there are right now, there are driverless cars that'll get into accidents, and those companies don't get prosecuted. This AI thing is even far more removed, because it's almost like they have a mind of their own. So you could have your bank account wiped out. I also talk about, going along those lines, I talk about in the book something called Q Day, which is it's the day where basically quantum computing meets AI. It's the day where quantum computing becomes so advanced that it can crack any code, or really, well, quantum computing is already that advanced, but when it becomes to just normal consumers.
Yeah.
Protect against that. We're basically at the doorstep right now where anybody could get a hold of a quantum computer. They're almost commercially available now. If you got enough money, you could probably get one. But and a lot of the problems that they used to have, they've solved. They're not as delicate as they used to be. Quantum computers used to be so fragile that they were really hard to deal with, just because of quantum fluctuations and things that would affect it. But not anymore. Many companies have corrected for those things. Well, once a government, a criminal organization, just some person that wants to steal some money, once somebody can get a hold of a quantum computer, they could use that to hack into bank accounts and wipe everybody out. Not only that, they can hack into government secrets, all that stuff. Well, imagine merging that with AI, and now you have an AI that can do that and can do whatever. Well, now that's making me wonder, like, does that have some kind of connection to the Antichrist and the mark of the beast? Is that how the Antichrist is able to get in control of the world seemingly pretty easily in such a short amount of time? He's only got 7 years to really deal with here, and he comes on the scene pretty fast, and gets in power pretty fast. Might that have something to do with it? And so what that tells us today is, like, man, we got to protect our assets. We have to be very wary about, trusting banks and stuff. I'm a big advocate of like gold and silver. I work with Cornerstone. They're all Christians. They're just like us. They know about Nephilim and prophecy. Great company. I go through them, but we need to start thinking about these types of things, because yes, we're waiting for the rapture. We know that the rapture is going to protect us from the really bad stuff. And I'm a pre-trib guy, so that's what I believe. But that doesn't mean that disasters can't come first. There are birth pangs, and those birth pangs can absolutely destroy our lives if we're not careful. So we have to be prepared. I even end the book with that. I say, how to be a watchman, how to be prepared against all this stuff. So yeah, that's why this whole topic is so important.
It's the Matthew 10:16 instruction to be as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. I think that we can see these things coming, but we still have to be aware that we're going to go through, or we are already going through, a form of tribulation, just not the great tribulation.
Yep.
So I've got a question for you based on something. This is what I've been teaching recently, but You probably saw the opening of the Winter Olympics. And in the opening of the Winter Olympics, one of the videos that I showed was there was an angel walking around the stage, and then he takes a woman who is enclosed within a box, and he takes her out of the box, and the two start intertwining in this dance, and then they throw up the uh, the occultish sort of throwback to Horus, the one eye sort of symbol continually. And I'm thinking of that because to me, if we look at the 2024 Olympics, the Olympics now, the Winter Olympics, it seems like overt trailers being shown for certainly a nefarious occultish agenda ahead, but you can't sort of take the Nephilistic and Watcher um, imagery out of that. So in that sense, do you think that the Watchers, if with the return of the Watchers, that there are complicit human beings, those in power, who are, along for the ride with the Watcher agenda, along for the ride with the agenda of the enemy, and they're sort of bringing or trying to usher this stuff onto the scene?
Yeah, for sure. And it's being shown because these things, the enemy is very prideful. So they're going to boast about it. They're going to show off about it. Just like how people today in the turmoil of our world, they commit crimes and they're so boastful about it. They record videos about it. I mean, even though they know it's going to get them in trouble, they're going to get convicted because that evidence is going to be used against them, but they do it anyway. It's a satanic psychology. And exactly what you said, the symbolism behind that seems like to me at some point, the Watchers, fallen angels, the enemy, Satan, whatever, I'll just say the enemy is going to make an offer to mankind, like, hey, don't accept Jesus. I can provide you your resurrection now. Maybe through technology. Transhumanism is big in this. So to me, the woman in the box, it's like, okay, she's dead. Pull her out of it. That's a false resurrection, but that's like a resurrection, and it's the angel, and then there's like the dance, like a mating thing, which goes back into the Watchers Nephilim stuff. And when we read through Revelation, that sounds exactly like the kinds of things that are going to be proclaimed. The Antichrist whole deal is being the Antichrist. So he's taking everything that Jesus did and offers, and he's perverting it through his own satanic means. So, one example of that, a lot of people wonder what the abomination of desolation is. There's some kind of desecration of the temple. Well, I believe, for one thing, when you look at the imagery in Revelation 8, it talks there's a heavenly temple scene. And it talks about, incense and smoke, and there's a censer and all this stuff. That's all imagery drawn from the Day of Atonement practices. And the idea is that they would have to perform the certain rituals, the temple stuff. They would have to perform all those on a certain time, certain day, because in heaven, angels were doing similar things in the heavenly temple. Now, they're not sacrificing animals or anything like that, but they're doing similar things at the same time. That's why it was so important that the ancient Jews would have to do these things on specific the right days. Well, so you get all that imagery, and there's this silence for half an hour in heaven. I always wondered what that was about. Well, come to find out, the temple part of the Day of Atonement ceremony, the part that's in the temple, it takes a half an hour to complete. So I believe what's happening there is the Antichrist himself is going in and desecrating the temple. He's using his own blood to desecrate the temple, and that's what the silence in half an hour is about. And it takes him a half an hour to complete this ritual. We get a precursor of that with Antiochus Epiphanes, who slaughtered a pig in the. And this is in the intertestamental period. But he slaughtered a pig in the Jewish temple and defiled it that way. Well, I think that in a sense, I would call it like a type or shadow of what the Antichrist is going to do. I fully believe the Antichrist is going to shed his own blood, because what what more perverse than Nephilim blood? And the reason that I think that the Antichrist is Nephilim is because, as we saw, the punishment for the Watchers mating with humankind was to basically be bound in the abyss. Satan is not bound in the abyss. Satan was not involved in this original 200 Watchers thing. He didn't commit that sin, but apparently he must commit it in the future because he is bound for 1,000 years in the abyss. That's the same judgment that the Watchers get.
Yeah.
So, and all throughout the Bible, the Antichrist is called son of perdition. It's basically, I believe that he's literally the son of Satan. I believe Satan commits this act one time to create the Antichrist. And what more profane than Nephilim blood could there possibly be to defile the temple with? And I believe that the slaughtering of a pig was just a picture of that, because, sometimes Gentiles are compared to, like, especially unregenerate pagans and stuff. They're compared to pigs and things like that. That was a picture of the future thing. So the Antichrist is going to do that. Now, I don't know if that has something to do with the deadly head wound and the resurrection thing. I don't know how all that works out, but it's all a perverse a flip of what Jesus did, how Jesus sacrificed his life so we could have eternal life. The Antichrist is going to do something. He's going to shed his blood, I believe, in the temple to defile the temple, and then do something to, in a sense, have some kind of sacrifice to provide to humankind some type of false salvation. And I believe that we're seeing the birth pangs of that now with things like transhumanism and wanting to upload consciousness and wanting to use biohacking to super improve the body and make us more than human. I talk about in the book how China is now trying to create super soldiers by splicing tardigrade DNA into human beings. And tardigrades are these little tiny microscopic animals that are, like, really, really strong, and they can withstand a lot of deadly things. And if people think that that's too out there, they've already made hybrid woolly mice. They want to bring back the woolly mammoth. By the way, the biggest story with this, I dedicated a whole chapter to it, is the dire wolf. They say that they have de-extincted the dire wolf. It's not a dire wolf. It's actually much worse. What they've done is they've made a hybrid. They've made something that was never supposed to be. You can't de-extinct an animal that's all gone without you. You got to have that animal to be able to reproduce it. So the best that they can do is they can take dead DNA, they can take DNA from dead animals, and they can splice that with a similar animal. And that's what they did. They took dire wolf DNA. And they used AI to do this because DNA is so complex. You basically need AI and that type of computing power to be able to analyze all of it. They used AI, and again, this is why I believe that the Watchers are influencing AI, because we're using it to make hybrids. They used AI to sequence all the genetic stuff they needed from the dire wolf, and then they implanted that into modern, like, gray wolves and stuff like that. So they did not de-extinct the dire wolf. But what they did was far worse. They made a hybrid that was never supposed to exist. Now, some might say, well, that's all in the wolf family, so it's okay. You can have different dog breed, and it's fine. All right, maybe. But in an attempt to bring back the woolly mammoth, what they've experimented on now, they have created woolly mice. So they have actually taken extinct woolly mammoth DNA, and they spliced it in with mouse DNA, and they have pictures and stuff of these things. They're like these really fluffy orange little mice. They're woolly mice. So you might be able to say that about the wolves. Well, they're all in the wolf species, so it's okay, and it's definitely not. But you might be able to say that. You definitely can't say that about an elephant type creature, a woolly mammoth, and a mouse. They have nothing to do with each other. Yet we're now making these things, and again, it's all through AI. So we can see how these birth pangs are going to lead to whatever's going to happen in the tribulation. And I believe that all these hybrids, like what we looked back in Enoch, it wasn't just angel to man hybridization; it was also animal to animal hybridization. So it's all birth pangs for stuff we're going to see in the tribulation. But that doesn't mean that it's not as dangerous as it absolutely is.
I want to pick up on something you said, because it was kind of a light bulb moment for me. The Revelation 8 moment, marking the kind of Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. In that sense, if the Antichrist is going in and, like you said, shedding his blood, is this a throwback to Leviticus 16 and the scapegoat? You know, where
Yes,
you've got two choices. You've got the choice of the covering, which is a representation of Jesus Christ, you know, the covering of the blood and being free from your sin, or going into the wilderness
that's
with
right. That's exactly
Azazel.
right. That's exactly right. And like I said before, even in the original language, that scapegoat is Azazel. And when you
Yeah.
really look at it in the original language, it's because again they took the Book of Enoch seriously, and so they knew this whole story about Azazel. So there was that where Azazel was placed. It was called Dudiel. So he was placed under the earth in this place called in this desert place called Dudiel.
Yeah.
And from what we understand, it was I don't know exactly where it is, but it's about 12 miles away from the temple. And
Mhm.
so what they would do is, yeah, again, they would take these two goats and they would basically cast lots. They would have these two things. One would say the name of God, one would say the name of Azazel. And so they would just by chance, pick one without looking, put one on one goat, one on the other. So the one that was for Yahweh, for God, they would take and they would sacrifice, and that's a picture of Christ. But then the other one that had the name for Azazel, for a scapegoat, they
Mhm.
would take 12 miles away to this place, this Dudiel place, where there was a cliff and there was all this jagged rocks and everything. And it even says in Enoch that, place these jagged rocks on Azazel and all this stuff. And they
Mhm.
they would throw the goat over the edge, which would absolutely crush it and destroy it. But the whole picture was to try to remind the Jews, like, hey, there is this figure coming. There is going to be this false Christ. They're going to look exactly the same because it's two
Mhm.
goats that look exactly the same. It's going to look like Christ. It's going to look like the Messiah, but don't believe it. That was the whole point of that ritual. But they got degraded. They've kind of forgot. And even Jesus said, me you won't accept, but when another comes, I forget the exact wording, but another comes and him you will accept.
Yeah.
So they will accept this person, this Antichrist figure. They'll accept him as the Messiah, and you're exactly right, and that's what that whole thing was about.
Well, in that scenario, so you've got the return of the Watchers, and then I think you've got Azazel, who's maybe off that, but maybe the Hasatan figure. I don't know if you think that, but maybe because of the certain things that are surrounding him. I know the Apocalypse of Abraham talks about him being in the garden as a seraphim. So, would it be fair to say, and this I'm trying to thrash out this question quickly in my head, but would it be fair to say that you've got the Watchers, the return of the Watchers would represent maybe the return of, let's say, jailers, or those who maybe it's a prison break and they're on the scene, um, and that would sort of fit in with the terminology that we see in Daniel 4, where they're called a year, IYR, which is the same word for watcher, but it's also the same word for city. And we see things like 15-minute cities growing up. So when you start to see the control aspect of society through artificial intelligence, tokenization, digital identification, all of that network closing down, it is kind of representative of the return of the Watcher's influence, and maybe a prison break of those. I know I'm using that term loosely, but of those individuals on the scene to prepare an atmosphere ready that is prison rules, lawless, right? For the son of perdition, or the lawless one, to come on the scene. Is that a fair analogy?
Yeah, I would say so, because and the only thing I would add to that is in Prison Break, if any of them get out, it's because God's allowing it, but it's also because humankind has
Yeah.
been so evil. It's like fine, you want these, it's almost like God saying, like, okay, you don't want me, you want these things. You think these things are gonna protect you and serve you and take care of you? Well, let's see how they treat you.
Mhm.
And so God does let some of them out. Some of them are bound till Jesus returns, and then you have the judgment of the angels and all that. But there are some that get out early. So in that sense, yeah, jailbreak is a fair term for it. And I believe that what they're trying to do is what they were basically trying to do pre-flood. They were trying to control the world, take it from God. They absolutely hate humanity. They want it for themselves. They need humanity because there's certain things that they can't do, but eventually they want basically a Nephilim utopia, a golden age. There's other like Greeks or whatever. They refer to that time as like the golden age because they like there's other people and they think of it as a good thing.
Yeah.
People that don't know all this history and that are ignorant to it think that was a good thing when gods walked among men. But that's little g gods and they were all corrupt and evil. So that was not a good thing.
Yeah.
But it was the time where the enemy, from the enemy's perspective, not from God's, but from the enemy's perspective, they almost won. They were this close. So they want to, now, of course, from God's perspective, it's like, they were never close at all. They were never going to win.
Yeah.
God just through his own wisdom, by his own choice, God let it go on as long as he did, and then he put an end to it, which is what he's going to do again. But that's what they want to recreate. That's what they want to do. And when you read all of Revelation through that lens, you understand the choices that the enemy's making. And then when you understand that, you can look at the world today and you can see the enemy's influence and you can see, like, why are they gifting us with all this technology? Because again, I don't believe that we just developed that on our own because we could have done that hundreds of years ago. We have basically the same brains. If anything, our brains today are way more degenerated than they were generations ago.
Yeah.
But we have the same brains. We have access to the same materials. So why is it that 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, whatever, why is it that we didn't develop this kind of technology then when, it was available? Well, I believe that there's a restraining force. There's the restrainer, Thessalonians talks about this. I believe that that's the church. That's the Holy Spirit dwelling in believers. That's the church. There's a restraining thing that's not allowing the enemy to do things until their time. But I believe that because we're living in the end of the end times and we are right at the doorstep of the rapture and tribulation, it's almost like that restraining is kind of loosening a little bit. And and it is through just how horrible and evil the world is. It's letting some of these more demonic influences slip through more than usual. And I believe we're going to see more and more of that, but it's all birth pangs. And Jesus told us that, not to worry, these things must happen. These things will happen. So we just need to be prepared for it. We need to just see it for what it is. We need to make sure daily we are right with Jesus. And I keep telling people this in pretty much every video I do now, like, it's time to be bold. It is not time to be timid anymore. If you have family, and when I say bold, I don't mean rude. Don't be rude. Be loving, but be bold. If you have family, friends, people that you love and care about that are not saved, it is time to talk to them, and it is time to try to get them saved. Present the gospel to them if you haven't already. If you have and they've said, I don't want to hear about it, then okay, pray for them from afar. That's fine. Pray for them for sure, but don't be rude and keep bugging them about it. But if you can get through to some of these, like, now's the time to do it. We have waited too long. We've been timid too long as the church. And a lot of churches have degraded to the point where they're just accepting sin. And we as Christians are too quick to still call them Christians. We need to be more bold and say, they're not of us. Like, if a church is promoting all these sinful things, you can't call that Christian. You know them by their fruit. Also, it says in the Bible, there's certain attributes of people to stay away from. Reviling, revilers, which is basically people that want to stir up trouble and talk bad about other people. We need to get more used to cutting certain people out of our lives, but we also need to present people with the gospel as well. So it's now is the time, because we are right at the doorstep. I believe any time, really. Actually, if you go by the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which I do, I fully believe in it. Again, I wrote about that in Forgotten Prophecies of the Dead Sea Scrolls. People can pick up that and Return of the Watchers at prophecywatchers.com, best place to get it. But in that, I go through the Essene calendar. It's the calendar that the Bible itself uses from Genesis to Revelation. I prove it in those books. You can use it for prophetic things. It doesn't tell you exactly when the rapture is, but in that calendar system, they had an understanding of what's called ages. There's 2,000-year periods called ages, and they expected 3.5 of those for all of human history. So 7,000 years, which is modeled after the week. Well, actually, the week would be modeled after God's whole plan of 7,000 years. So when it says a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day, that's what it's talking about. It's talking about this calendar. Well, what's interesting is they called our age the age of grace, and very, very soon, March 18th is going to be the first day of the final Jubilee, the final
Mhm.
50 years of our age of grace. And it's usually during that time. And sometimes a Jubilee is called a generation.
Mm.
And so when Jesus says this generation will not pass away, I believe that that's probably talking about the final Jubilee on that calendar. And we're about to enter it in like a month and a couple of days from the time of
Yeah.
this recording. Now that does not mean that we have to wait till the end of the 50 years for Jesus to return. It doesn't mean anything like that, because the age of Torah, which was the previous age to ours, their final Jubilee would have been between the years 26 AD and 76 AD. Between that 50 years, Jesus came really early in that final Jubilee.
Yeah.
Our final Jubilee is between 2026 AD and 2076 AD. Jesus could return early. And somebody might ask, well, if the tribulation is before, if it's well before 2076 and 2076 starts the final Sabbath age, the 1,000-year reign, what is all that extra time for? Well, we know that in Ezekiel, it talks about a millennial temple. So that's something that's going to have to be built. When Herod's temple took 40 years to build. So
Mhm.
that's something that's actually going to have to be built by people. I don't believe that we'll be glorified at that point. So we're not, we
Yeah.
won't have a use for that temple, but there's going to be people who survive the tribulation and who enter in and repopulate the millennium. There's a city and there's a temple that need to be built. There are still things after the return of Christ, but before the millennial reign, that need to be accomplished. So
Mhm.
you could very easily have a rapture and a 7-year tribulation at any time. And we come back with Jesus. Jesus goes through all of his judgments of people, and a few people are let into. These are people who are saved and who survived, didn't take the mark. They survived the tribulation, and they're allowed to enter into the millennium and reproduce. And when you
Mhm.
read the last 10 or so chapters of Ezekiel, that goes through all the temple duties. That goes through basically how the millennium is going to work. So you do have these people who are still not glorified like we will be, but they are still in human bodies. They're saved, but they still participate in these things. So that temple is going to have to be built at some point. That city is going to have to be built at some point. And I could see that taking. I don't believe that Jesus is going to come down, snap his fingers, and it's all going to be done. I
Mhm.
believe people are going to build that because they're going to be the ones that are using it. That's going to take some time, and there's going to be very few people left after the tribulation to repopulate. So, and that's the model. After Noah, there was only 8 after that. After the flood of Noah to repopulate, there'll probably be a little more than 8, but those are going to be the people that are going to have kids, are going to
Yeah.
build this temple and everything. So that's how you can have that gap of possibly decades between the end of the tribulation and the start of the millennium. So I just want to say that, because every time I talk about the calendar and I bring up the year 2076, people freak out and they're like, well, I'm in my 60s, I'm never going to make it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, fair enough, but that's not what that's saying. The rapture could happen at any moment. The rapture could happen today, the tribulation could start tomorrow, and this calendar could still be intact. Now, I tend to think that this is going to happen within the last 50 years at some point. So, but I would never put a timing on the rapture itself, except to just say
Mhm.
I believe it's pre-trib. But that last 50 years begins March
Mark.
18th, according to their calendar of this year. So, very exciting time to be alive.
It really is, and I think that, like, we've talked about this before, and messaged about it before as well. Is one of the things that catches my attention is the War Scroll, because it's very well documented. I know it's in fragments and it's probably hard to decipher, but it determines a 40-year sort of best of 7 conflict
Mhm.
between the sons of light and the sons of Belial, or Belial. Now, when you look at that, I think I messaged you before. I did actually, and said, could it have started at this? And I talked about, like, issues with Israel, like wars and the skirmishes that maybe the surrounding nations of Israel had, or around Israel had with Israel. But then the other thing is I've seen some people before say 2001, the start of the war on terror. Did that mark the start of that 40 years? And if that was the case, that would take us to 2041. If that was, because it ends in Armageddon, if that was 7 years previous to that, you're around the 2034 mark, which is right on the precipice of the the anniversary, or the church anniversary of the birth of Christ. And that also fits with, now I'm not saying I'm not date setting, because I think it's purposely ambiguous
Yeah.
for us, but I think as well that would fit with, I think 2036 is another arrival of Apophis.
Yes.
But then the same occurs if you take it, say, let's say that 40-year conflict started at 2023, which gets everybody who's watching now up in arms, because then they think 2063. But then again, you've got an Apophis flyby or event in 2068. So I think it's purposely ambiguous.
Yeah.
It's with it, God gives us the season, like you say,
Yes.
and the generation, but he keeps it ambiguous. He says it could be then, it could be then. I'm not going to tell you which one. It's going to be a case of this will just happen. But like you say, it's so exciting to witness all this. And I want to sort of just close with this sort of, I kind of go in this direction very quickly.
Sure.
I don't know if you're aware of, I think it was 2012, 2013, there was a think tank model called Game B.
Oh, no, I haven't heard of that.
So Game B this is where we get a lot of our AI from now, a lot of the sort of advancements in technology. And I'll lay it out very, very quickly. So basically it didn't last very long, about a year. All these technocrats and financiers and philanthropists all came together because they believed that the world was doomed, and they would be able to think, because they were big thinkers, think a way to a better future. Now, I think it lasted about 18 months, probably close to 2 years max, and then the whole experiment stopped. Now, it re-emerged in 2020, and the reason it stopped is because the people who were involved branched into two different groups. One group believed that the future of humanity needed to be legislated, so they needed things that were technologically based, such as artificial intelligence, central bank digital currencies that applied cross-border, that were outside the state and government rule. The other side believed that the biggest problem to humanity's survival is independent thought. And now we have got, like you're saying with this Return of the Watchers, you've got an environment now where the algorithm leads the thinking of complacent people, because they're sitting watching something and then the next video pops up, and then it's information bias continually. And this goes back to the question that I sort of posed earlier. Human elites that are complicit with this agenda, would you sort of fall into the line of thinking that there are the 300 families, the 13 families, that sort of thing, the bloodlines of the Nephilim that I know Gary Wayne talks about, these bloodlines passing through the ages, that are trying to bring about this agenda? Do you think this is like those in dark corners of royalty, of governments, are colluding to some degree?
Well, it wouldn't surprise me if demonic forces pay attention to certain families and bloodlines and things like that. There does seem to be something to that. The only thing that I would say is it's more about what the enemy's doing and how the enemy is influencing people, rather than something wrong in people's blood. So, like one thing, I don't believe right now. I don't believe that a true Nephilim could even be created, like an angel to person hybrid
Yeah.
could be created right now, because we're in the age of grace. There's a restrainer. If Satan could have done it, he would have. But I believe that there's this restraining force happening, which actually goes back to another theory that once the restrainer is removed, maybe that's when Satan impregnates a woman, and maybe that accounts for some of that gap, some of those extra years between until 2076, because that child has to grow up. Maybe it takes 20 years to grow up, come to political power. We don't know how old the Antichrist is. He'll probably be 33 when he when he does the
Yeah.
abomination thing. So that'd be my best guess. But so perhaps, but so we have this restraining force that's restraining the powers of darkness. And when you look back at ancient church fathers and stuff, I mean, like if you have Christians in the room, like there's this whole account of Apollo and the oracle, and these Christians were in the room, and like Apollo couldn't even talk, couldn't even lie anymore, and just eventually just went away. And so it's kind of funny seeing this restraining force in effect. But I believe once the rapture happens, then that could happen. So if there are still any Nephilim genetics, I personally, there might be. If there are any Nephilim genetics in anybody's blood, it's not. It's minuscule to the point where
Yeah.
like they can still get saved, because Jesus says, preach the gospel to all nations, make disciples of all nations. In one part of that, it says every creature, and so the idea is, some people have taken from that, even if there are still some Nephilim genetics. People go to different blood types and like the RH stuff, and to me, it's like I don't think we should focus on that, because those people can still be saved. But there are people out there that say no, they can't be saved, and I think that's completely wrong and completely antithetical to the gospel. Anybody can be saved. We're supposed to preach the gospel. And who are we to determine by somebody's blood type, well, they can't be saved, so don't even bother? I mean, that's really similar to, when people would look at different races of people and say, well, don't bother giving them the gospel. They're subhuman. They can't accept it anyway. There were people that had that view. So we see a few people like that now. And I'm not talking about Gary Wayne. I really don't know what he teaches on this topic. So I'm not throwing him in that bus. I don't know what he teaches, but I would say it's not so much about the blood type, but itself. Like, I don't think there's a genetic factor you can look at somebody's blood and say, oh, they're a Nephilim, they're not going to be able to be saved. I don't believe that whatsoever. But I do believe that the enemy does pay attention to certain familial lines and certain family lines. That doesn't mean if you're born into that family that you're destined to be evil, or that you're destined to. Anybody can break out of that. Like my father, I have no contact with him. He was, and not to, just being honest, he's one of the most evil people I've ever met, but he's still my biological father. Now, just because I have his blood in my veins, that doesn't mean that I have to go down the same road he went down to. I can accept Jesus, and for everybody, I don't hate my father or anything. Pray for him. You don't need to know his name. God knows it, but pray for him. I do want him to come to repentance sometime. I have no contact with him, and in this life, I can't and I won't, because it's too dangerous. I'd be putting myself and my family at risk in doing that. But just pray for Josh's biological father, that he gets saved someday. I don't want, as bad of a person as he is, I don't want to see him or anybody go to hell. Anyway, I don't have to follow in those footsteps just because my genetics are that certain way, just because my blood is that certain way. I can accept Jesus and I can go down a different path. So that would be the only thing that I'd say about that is, the enemy does. It seems like, I mean, even in alien abduction scenarios, you see that almost passed down from generation to generation. So the enemy does pay attention to family lines, but that doesn't mean that we're slave to that. We can break out of that through Jesus.
Well, the name of Jesus breaks the generational curse. And
amen.
I can even speak, in terms of my wife, I know that we have nothing to do with her father. A lot of people know the story. He was exposed. He was a pedophile. And so we just, for safety, for anything like that, we just cannot ever be involved. A very evil man. But that doesn't pass on in the family,
Right.
And that's the thing to realize. I think, I know with Gary, what he's talking about is the sort of influential families who court the occult worship.
Sure.
Those elites that are courting they're not worshiping God, but they're maybe worshiping a bloodline.
And that gets followed down through tradition in their own families. So they bring up their kids into that, and that gets passed down. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, look, I know we're closing here. I know I've taken up a lot of your time, but if we were to look at everything that's happening right now and the return of the Watchers, and we're certainly seeing it in the sense that there's a technological jump that has happened in the last 50 years, the atmosphere is set is basically 2 Timothy 3 1-5. That wicked atmosphere, that wicked generation. What would be a message of hope for everybody watching today that
Oh
you
well,
could
it's
give?
just yeah, it's just what Jesus told us. Like these things are bad, and I'm paraphrasing here, but don't worry. Like don't be afraid, don't fear it, because these things are supposed to happen. These things will happen, even if we go through persecution ourselves. It's best to be prepared to know what's going on to give ourselves the best shot. But even when we get persecuted, we know that it's for Christ.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't have to fear that the way that the world fears. Be prepared, yes, and this is for people who are already in Christ. Don't fear it. Be aware. Be wise as serpents, gentle as doves, and definitely get out there and preach the gospel and all of that. Make disciples of all nations. But like Jesus said, basically, this is going according to plan. Jesus holds all this in his hands. The enemy can't do anything that God doesn't allow. So God is in control ultimately, and you are safe. Even if you die, you are still safe because you are in God's hands, and nothing can take you away from that. So that's our security as Christians. And through that, what we want to do, knowing that, we want to provide that gift to other people. It's not a gift we give. We tell of the gift that Jesus has given on the cross. We want to extend that to other people, and that's the best way to combat the kingdom of darkness that's encroaching over the earth so much right now. A lot of people look for a political solution.
Mm-hmm.
There's not going to be a political solution to a spiritual problem.
Yeah.
But you get enough people saved, all the politics, all the opinions you think people should have, all of that will fall into place
Mm-hmm.
if you get them saved and get them discipled correctly, get them into a good Bible believing church or at least an online community. Get hooked up with Gary Mckibben here, Pastor Gary Mckibben and his church. Watch his online stuff. There's lots of online stuff. Mike Winger is great. Chuck
Yeah.
Missler, all of his stuff was really good. There's a lot of good teaching stuff for new believers that will get them up to date on stuff, but will help grow in their faith. So, and another thing for what we Christians need to realize too is it doesn't just say get people saved. It's good
Yeah.
if you can get people saved. That's great. But it says make disciples of all nations. So you can't just get somebody saved and then leave. I mean,
Yeah.
of course, if you're passing through a town and you happen to a restaurant and you witness to the waitress, great. You get her saved, awesome. But don't just leave her with nothing, after that. Give her some good resources. Tell her, okay, now you got to find a good church and get baptized, and leave her with some good online resources. Like we do have the internet. We can use that. It's not just a tool for evil.
Yeah.
We can use that
Yeah.
for good. We can use that. And there's lots of I had a friend for since I was 12 years old, 12, 13, 14 years old. I've had this friend, and he was never a believer up until just recently, because he always knew I was a Christian. I always talked to him about it, but he never said or did anything that messed with my faith or my walk. Like he never encroached in that. So there was never really a time where I felt like I had to stop being friends with him or anything.
Yeah.
He respected my view, and from time to time he would have questions and I would talk to him about it. And it took decades, but maybe a year ago, a few months ago. Well, it was probably about a year ago. He got a hold of me and he said that he was ready to believe. He was ready to accept Christ, and so praise God. But I didn't just leave him at that point. Now, of course, at that time, my son got sick. There was a whole bunch of other stuff with that. So I wasn't able to be there as much, but when he texted and when he had questions, I gave him really good resources of teachers that I trust, people again, like Mike Winger is a really good one. He's got a lot of everything from beginner to more advanced stuff, and he's really solid. Andy Woods, I think, is really good. Yourself, Chuck Missler has a lot of great stuff. So there's people that you can point people to, even if you don't have the time to instruct them yourself. But the whole point is make disciples of all nations. Don't just get people saved, because the enemy can come in and take that away from them, as in the parable with the 4 different types of seeds and stuff like that, the farmer. So, I guess the main message of hope is if you're secure in Christ, you're secure in Christ. And even if you die, even if the enemy works things out where you lose your life, you're not really losing your life, because you're secure in Jesus. So just hold on to that. understand the dark world that we live in, and then know that don't put your light under a bushel. Know that your power is in the Holy Spirit. It is in Jesus Christ. It's in God the Father, and He'll equip you. Just go out there and be obedient. That's all. That's all we can do.
Amen. What a fantastic message, and an encouragement for those that are witnessing to their loved ones, and they feel like they're getting nowhere. You don't know what seed is being sown and where it's germinating and where it's actually taking root. And like maybe years later, but the fruit, the word will not return void. So just keep planting. I want to thank you for coming on. I'll just finish the broadcast here and then you stick around for just a second. So I want to
Sure.
thank you for coming on. And guys, if you can do me the favor, if you can go on, if you're in the States or anything like that, I think Prophecy Watchers is probably the best source to go to get Josh's books. If you're in the UK, I know because I've tried to purchase directly from Prophecy Watchers, the delivery is quite expensive. It's on Amazon as well.
Yes. Yep. It's on
Yeah,
Amazon
yeah,
and wherever people get it. If you could leave me a review, that would be really
yeah.
helpful because that helps Amazon's algorithm go and share it to other people. So we want to do that. So that would be helpful too.
Perfect. So if you're getting it on Amazon, make sure you leave that review, guys. And you know, I've got quite a few of Josh's books, and we've talked about them on here before. They're a great resource. So again, go and check that out. Make sure you are up to date on that. Also, if you're not yet a member of the Substack, my Substack, please consider joining. Remember that we have taken on the care of 40 orphans in Kenya, and we now have a church that is already going in Kenya that we're now taking mentorship and leadership over. So whatever is raised on the Substack, that is all going towards trying to school feed and clothe the 40 orphans. So check out the Substack, check out Josh's book, Prophecy Watchers, or Amazon for those resources, and follow Josh on Daily Renegade as well. Always a fantastic array of videos and teachings out there. Guys, I call you the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, kings, queens, and priests in Jesus' mighty name. And remember, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens